The arena was flooded with light so harsh it flattened every shadow. Banks of spotlights tracked across a sea of faces. Families pressed shoulder to shoulder, women clutching handbags and hymn books, teenagers filming on shaky phones. The smell was thick: popcorn, perfume, sweat, the faint tang of disinfectant from the hallways. Music rolled like thunder, strings swelling, drums pounding, until the crowd rose to its feet, clapping in rhythm. On stage, Hinn commanded the air as though he owned it. He moved with wide, sweeping gestures, hair glowing under the lights, his jacket snapping with each turn. His voice cracked through the microphone like a whip, high one moment, tender the next, perfectly rehearsed but played as spontaneous. Every tilt of his hand summoned screams. People staggered forward, eyes closed, arms raised, some sobbing, others shaking. The cameras loved him. Tight shots of trembling lips, a child pressed against his mother's chest, an old man leaning on a cane as if preparing to stand without it. The entire spectacle ran like a machine built for emotion. Technicians knew when to drop the music, when to flare the lights, when to widen the shot to show the wave of bodies swaying in rhythm. For thousands watching live and millions more on television, it looked unstoppable. And yet, tucked quietly among the crowd, sat a figure who did not sway, did not clap, did not mouth the words to the music. Chuck Norris sat 3 rows from the floor, wearing a plain shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show his wrists, nothing about him staged. No entourage, no camera crew. He could have been any man who had wandered in out of curiosity, but people noticed. Now and again, as Benny raised his arms, the spotlight would sweep over that corner of the arena, and whispers ran like sparks. That's him, Chuck Norris." A few phones tilted toward him, shaky zooms capturing the stoic face in a sea of fervor. He didn't return the stares. He watched the stage, eyes steady, jaw relaxed, as though he were simply taking measure of the noise around him. The contrast was jarring. Benny was all heat and fire, striding, pointing, his jacket tossed across a stagehand's arm to free his movements. He preached of demons and deliverance, of strength beyond flesh, his voice cracking with urgency. Each time he shouted, the crowd cried back, eager to prove belief. Then, in a moment designed to crest, Benny paused. He lifted his chin, scanning the arena, letting silence hang just long enough. His eyes locked on the row where Chuck sat, still, unyielding. A smile crept onto his lips, the smile of a man who'd found new material. "There are some here tonight," he boomed, "who believe power lives in fists, not in spirit." He raised a hand toward Chuck's row, not naming him outright, but the cameras turned instantly, landing square on the familiar face. Gasps rippled. Some laughed nervously. Others cheered Benny's daring. Chuck didn't move. He blinked once, slow, the faintest crease forming at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, not a frown, just an acknowledgement that he'd been singled out. The crowd reacted louder now, torn between awe and excitement. "Call him out!" someone yelled from the balcony. Applause swelled. Benny fed it, pacing the stage like a conductor driving the orchestra. He spread his arms wide, as if inviting judgment from heaven itself. "Strength of the body fades," he cried, voice breaking for effect. "But strength of the spirit, it conquers forever." He pointed again toward Chuck, his eyes glittering, savoring the electricity. "Even legends must bow to it." The camera cut to Chuck once more, projecting his calm face across 40-foot screens. The noise rose to a fever pitch. Some booing, some cheering, the whole arena split. Still, Chuck didn't react. His hands rested on his knees, his back straight. In the storm of lights, music, and voices, he remained unshaken, an island in chaos. The contrast hit harder than words. One man shouted at the heavens, robes and sweat and fire. The other sat in silence, untouched. And the longer Chuck refused to play his part, the sharper the tension grew. The arena, so used to being led, suddenly leaned into uncertainty. For the first time all night, Benny wasn't the only presence commanding attention. And in that charged pause, when the cameras swung back to the stage, the question pressed heavier than the music itself. What happens when spectacle meets silence head-on? Just wondering. Where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. The music softened into a hum, strings tapering down, leaving space for Benny's voice to rise again. He paced the stage with calculated pauses, eyes roaming until they fell back to the same corner of the arena. Chuck hadn't shifted. The cameras caught it, his face projected again across the big screens. The crowd, wound tight already, knew what was coming before Benny opened his mouth. "Why wait in the shadows?" Benny asked, one hand extended toward him, palm up. His tone wrapped the words as an invitation, but the smirk made it clear. This was a challenge. "Come, show us what strength looks like when it stands next to God." The building erupted. Thousands of voices clashed, some chanting Benny's name, others shouting for Chuck to rise. The floor shook under the stomping. For the production crew, it was gold. A split audience, dueling allegiances, a story too good to script. At first, Chuck didn't move. He sat with the patience of a stone, watching the storm churn around him. Some in the crowd booed, interpreting stillness as refusal. Others shouted his name louder, urging him to prove himself. When he finally pushed to his feet, the sound doubled, people leaping to record, others gasping at the very idea of him stepping into the stage light. His walk was unhurried. He threaded through the aisle without ceremony, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Security shifted nervously, but no one stopped him. He climbed the stairs to the stage as if it were nothing more than a sidewalk curb. Benny spread his arms wide, beckoning the crowd louder, playing conductor once more. He turned slightly to face Chuck, already framing the encounter like theater. "Welcome," he said into the mic, voice dripping with irony. "A man of fists and fury, standing on holy ground." Laughter rippled from sections of the audience, quick and sharp. Chuck said nothing. He walked to center stage and stopped, a step away from Benny. The difference in their energy was stark. Benny gesticulating, pacing, coattails flicking with each turn. Chuck upright, motionless, the weight of his silence spreading wider than the microphone's reach. The cameras zoomed in on his face, searching for cracks. There were none. Just calm eyes, trained on Benny's. The crowd felt it instantly. The chants faltered, collapsing into a buzz of voices unsure whether to cheer or jeer. Benny thrived on filling silence, so he did what he always did. He mocked. With a dramatic sweep of his arm, he raised his palm toward Chuck's forehead as if to drive out demons. The gesture was exaggerated, rehearsed. He shouted a phrase that drew laughter and cheers, but Chuck didn't flinch. The hand hung in the air, centimeters from his brow, and the only movement on Chuck's face was a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. It looked like the shadow of a smile, small, but enough to ripple through the room. The laugh track of the crowd cracked. For the first time, some of the younger voices hushed. Benny dropped his hand, frustrated at the lack of reaction, and circled him, speaking into the mic with a flourish. "Here is a man who trusts flesh more than faith. A man who thinks silence makes him strong." He leaned close, speaking as if to Chuck, but really to the cameras. "But silence is weakness when the spirit roars." Chuck's eyes followed him, steady, unblinking. He never raised a hand, never touched the mic. His stillness became its own language, and the crowd could feel the translation even if they didn't yet understand it. The laughter scattered, replaced with murmurs. Some fans of Benny jeered louder, trying to keep the energy alive. Others leaned in, sensing something different, heavier. The building felt split down the middle, half desperate for Benny's theatrics to triumph, half waiting for Chuck's silence to mean something more. It became unbearable, the tension of one man shouting and another man refusing to be moved. The cameras cut back and forth. Benny, sweating under the lights, eyes wide with performance. Chuck, still, the faintest smile holding. The crowd had come for miracles and spectacle, but now they were staring at something else, something stranger. They weren't sure what it was, but they couldn't look away. And when Benny raised the mic again, gearing up for another line to tilt the audience back to his side, everyone was already leaning forward, waiting. Not for him, but for the man who hadn't spoken a single word. The lights never dimmed, yet the mood shifted, as if someone had drawn the oxygen out of the room. Benny lifted the mic, lips forming another sharp line meant to pull the audience back under his control. Chuck moved first. He stepped in, not aggressive, not slow, just close enough to close the space. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't play to the cameras. He leaned the smallest fraction forward and spoke a handful of words no one else could hear. The crowd saw it, but heard nothing. A few seconds stretched until they felt unnatural. Benny's expression twitched, not a gesture rehearsed, but the involuntary flicker of confusion. He opened his mouth for the next line, and nothing came out. A ripple of laughter bubbled from the stands, nervous, trying to cover the silence. It died instantly when Benny staggered. His free hand shot out to steady himself on thin air. His polished shoes scuffed against the stage. The mic caught only the scrape of his breath. He tried again, lips shaping words that never landed. His face drained, eyes blinking too fast. The hand that usually carved arcs of command rose awkwardly, searching for balance. Then gravity claimed him. He went down clumsily, knees folding, upper body tipping, as if pulled from inside. The microphone thudded on the boards, feedback screaming and then cutting. For an instant, the arena froze, thousands of bodies suspended between disbelief and explanation. The first screams came from the side sections. Some clapped as if it were theater, others shrieked in panic. A man shouted, "He's fainted!" A woman crossed herself 3 times. Hundreds of phones shot up, recording from every angle. The production booth scrambled. Cameras cut from wide to close to crowd and back, hunting for a narrative. They caught Benny on his side, his team surging forward, unsure if they were rescuing a preacher or interrupting a miracle. And through it all, Chuck stood still. He hadn't touched Benny. He hadn't raised a hand. His posture hadn't changed since the whisper. The calm on his face was more unnerving than the fall itself. Security filled the edges of the stage, black shirts forming a loose wall. Medics hurried with a kit, kneeling by Benny, who was trying to push himself up but failed twice. Sweat ran in a clean line down his temple. He looked not furious, not humiliated, just disoriented, like a man who had lost the script. The arena divided itself in real time. Some chanted Benny's name, desperate to keep the night alive. Others pointed, insisting they had seen something real, something unscripted. A wave of murmurs swept through the lower rows. What did he say? He never touched him. Replay it. There's nothing to replay. Up in the control room, an editor scrubbed the footage frame by frame. All he found was a mouth moving, a slight tilt of a head, then the collapse. No shove, no dramatic sweep, just a whisper that emptied a man's legs. On the screens, the replay looped again, Benny raising his hand, Chuck unmoving, then Benny's knees folding. Each cycle made the mystery sharper. Benny's assistants crouched beside him, offering water, patting his back, begging him to sit. He waved them off weakly, trying to speak into a mic no longer in his hand. The arena caught only fragments of air, a dry rasp swallowed by noise. Chuck shifted once, half a step back, his gaze lowered. Not triumphant, not smug. Simply finished. The crowd leaned forward, thousands of people waiting for someone, anyone, to explain what they had just witnessed. The commentators spoke half-sentences, then stopped. Social feeds lit up faster than the cameras could track. Words dropped him. Power beat power. Stage trick or truth? Benny stayed on his knees, chest rising, eyes moving in restless circles. The spectacle had unraveled. The showman, who could command thousands with a single gesture, was silent, unable to stand without help. And in the center of the stage, the man who had done nothing but whisper stood untouched, as calm as when he first rose from his seat. The question hung heavier than the lights. What had Chuck said, and why had it been enough to bring a man like Benny Hinn to the floor in front of everyone? The fall did not end the night. It shattered it. At first, the arena made one collective sound, a sharp gasp, like a lung collapsing. Then it broke into fragments. Screams ricocheted against laughter. Some cried out, "Miracle!" Others shouted, "Fraud!" The contradictions clashed so hard they felt like fists thrown in the dark. Rows of people surged to their feet. Some wept, arms lifted toward the stage as if the collapse were holy. Others shoved through aisles, phones aloft, desperate to capture proof of scandal. A man near the floor clutched his chest, shouting scripture. Two teenagers in the balcony laughed nervously, repeating, he dropped him," into their cameras. The air thickened with body heat, perfume, fear, the metallic bite of adrenaline. On stage, the scene had split in three. Benny lay half-curled, his assistants scrambling, one fanning his face with a program, another tugging at his collar, a third yelling for medics who were already rushing up the stairs. His limbs twitched, jerks of a man caught between willpower and collapse. Chuck stood 10 feet away, motionless, breathing so slow it looked staged. No raised hand, no shift in expression. It was as if time around him had slowed, while the rest of the building thrashed in double speed. And the crowd itself, screaming, crying, jostling, became its own character, louder than any voice on stage. Television crews scrambled to keep up. A reporter from a local affiliate spoke into her mic with the urgency of a war correspondent. Just moments ago, televangelist Benny Hinn fell to the stage after a brief exchange with actor Chuck Norris. Her words rattled across live feeds, spreading far beyond the walls of the arena. By the time she finished her first sentence, hashtags were already blooming online. Number Norris Whisper, number Benny Falls, number Miracle or Myth. The pressure on Chuck was visible, but not crushing. Camera lights fixed on his face, waiting for him to explain. The crowd demanded it too, voices rising in overlapping pleas and accusations. What did you say? Tell us the words. He's a prophet. He's a fraud. Chuck didn't answer. He stood with his hands at his sides, chin slightly lifted, as if silence itself were his only line. The refusal to explain turned the heat up higher. People shouted over each other, projecting their own truths into the void. Some claimed he'd cast a spell, others insisted it was a trick, others swore it was God himself moving through the moment. Every second without a word became fuel. Benny stirred, his body jerking like an engine refusing to start. His assistants lifted him to a half-seated position. His hair stuck damp to his forehead, his mouth working around sounds that wouldn't form words. A medic pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, nodding at the pulse, but frowning at the sweat streaming down his jawline. The audience erupted again, this time in competing chants, half crying, "Jesus!" and the other half shouting, "Chuck!" The two names collided, one ancient, one modern, until the sound became nothing but raw chaos. The production team tried to force order, cutting to crowd shots, lowering the house lights, but the noise would not obey. Reporters ran live commentary into headsets, voices cracking. The crowd is out of control here. Security is trying to hold the barriers. Down on the floor, security guards locked arms to keep the front rows from storming the stage. Mothers clutched children against their ribs. Men shouted at strangers in the row ahead, each convinced of their own version of truth. In the upper deck, a fight broke out, 2 men tearing at each other's jackets over whether what they'd seen was divine or deception. Through it all, Chuck's stillness read stranger, heavier. The more frantic the crowd became, the more deliberate his calm seemed. He didn't pace. He didn't blink at the flashes. He didn't even glance toward Benny. It was the kind of composure that mocked every scream in the building without needing words. The question was unavoidable now. Journalists shouted it. Fans screamed it. Even Benny's assistants demanded it with their eyes. What did he say? Chuck gave them nothing. The silence grew larger than the fall itself. Benny coughed, a raw bark, and tried to stand. His knees buckled again, and his men caught him. He reached for the mic one of them still clutched, but it slipped through his fingers. He tried once more, finally holding it against his chest, but his voice was gone. He looked across the stage, his eyes glassy, at the man who had undone him with nothing more than a whisper. The cameras zoomed in on the tableau. One man sweating, pale, gasping into a microphone he couldn't yet use. The other standing unshaken, silent, while the crowd roared itself to pieces. The broadcast cut abruptly to commercial. Inside the arena, though, there was no cut, no reprieve, just the sound of thousands demanding an answer, and the man at the center refusing to give one. The chaos was no longer confined to the stage. It lived in the aisles, in the fists clenched on pews, in the chants that battled until throats tore. And the longer Chuck said nothing, the more unbearable the question became. Benny's chest heaved as he clutched the microphone, the plastic slick in his hand. Assistants hovered, unsure whether to steady him or step back. His knees trembled, but he refused the chair someone dragged forward. He straightened as far as his spine allowed, chin lifted toward the lights. The crowd hushed in jagged waves, desperate for him to speak. When his voice finally returned, it was thinner than before, but the words landed heavy. "The Lord has spoken through this man." He pointed the mic toward Chuck with a trembling hand. "What you have witnessed is not humiliation. It is demonstration. God has used him to show his power." A roar erupted. Half the arena leapt to its feet, hands raised, crying, "Amen!" Others booed, shaking heads, muttering that the preacher was twisting. The split widened, visible in every row. Chuck remained where he was, arms still at his sides. He let the noise crest and collapse again before he spoke. His voice was low, steady, but it carried clean across the stage without amplification. "I didn't perform a miracle." The words cut sharper than a shout. People stilled, leaning forward, waiting for more. Chuck's gaze stayed locked on Benny. "I only reminded you of words you forgot." For a moment, nothing moved. The sentence seemed too plain, too small to carry the weight of what had just happened. But that simplicity became its weapon. The arena exploded. Cheers, boos, accusations, chants, all colliding into a sound that felt like metal tearing. Some pointed at Chuck, calling him prophet, messenger, chosen. Others cursed him, shouting that he had mocked a man of God. Entire rows turned on themselves, strangers arguing face to face. A woman sobbed in relief. A man stormed up the aisle, shaking his head. Benny's face twitched, his eyes widened, the mask of confidence cracking again. He raised the mic fast, trying to drown the storm. "Yes, exactly. The Spirit reminded me through him. The Lord's word cannot be hidden." He forced the crowd to respond, clapping his hands, urging them to echo. But the rhythm didn't catch. Some clapped, but the sound was thin, scattered, swallowed by louder voices still chanting Chuck's name. Others sat rigid, unsure whom to believe. The energy Benny used to bend crowds his entire career was failing him now, slipping through his fingers. Chuck took one step forward. The cameras zoomed instantly. He spoke again, measured, quiet. "Faith isn't theater." The silence after was heavier than any shout. Even those who hated him froze. It was the kind of phrase you couldn't clap over, because clapping would admit it had hit. Benny's jaw tightened. He raised his arm skyward, straining for his old rhythm. "The Spirit moves in ways we cannot understand," he cried. His voice cracked. He pointed back at Chuck as if trying to frame him inside his narrative. This man himself proves God's authority. But the crowd no longer moved as one. A chant of "Chuck! Chuck!" pulsed from the lower rows, met by countershouts of "Jesus! Jesus!" until the words collided in the rafters, indistinguishable from each other. Security shifted uneasily. Ushers whispered into radios, eyes on clusters of people now arguing nose to nose. Fists hadn't flown yet, but the atmosphere bristled, each second closer to snapping. Reporters barked into cameras, their voices pitched with disbelief. This service has turned into open division. The audience is split between worship and outrage. Broadcast feeds laced every home with the sound of chaos. Benny tried again to summon authority, pounding the mic against his palm. "Clap your hands for the Lord," he demanded. A section obeyed, but the applause scattered, unconvincing, drowned by shouts and whistles. Chuck said nothing more. He stood, eyes fixed on Benny, face unreadable. The restraint itself seemed louder than Benny's amplified voice. The tension folded the arena in two. In the lower bowl, a father held his son by the shoulders, whispering, "Watch. This is truth, not show." In the balcony, a woman shouted that Chuck had blasphemed. The divide widened not just between preacher and fighter, but between every person who had come seeking certainty and now found only questions. Benny's hand shook as he raised the mic again, eyes flashing with the desperation of a man who felt control slipping for the first time in years. He turned back to Chuck, voice breaking, "You dare to stand on this stage and deny the Spirit?" Chuck finally looked toward the crowd, his first glance away from Benny all night. His words were soft, almost conversational, yet they carried, "Truth doesn't need applause." The building fell quiet for one fragile heartbeat. Thousands of people held their breath, some trembling, some angry, some struck still by the weight of it. And then the storm began again. Shouts, prayers, accusations. Arguments broke out in aisles, security stepping in with raised hands. The spectacle had become a battlefield of belief, and Chuck's refusal to give more explanation only sharpened the split. The cameras lingered on the contrast. Benny sweating, trembling, reaching for volume to keep control. Chuck silent, steady, each phrase delivered like stone dropped in water. And in that chasm between noise and stillness, the crowd realized they weren't just watching a service gone wrong. They were watching two visions of power collide, one theatrical, one unyielding, and no one knew which would hold. The arena teetered on the edge of riot. Ushers fanned through aisles with outstretched arms, shouting for calm, but their voices vanished in the roar. People shoved shoulders, some crying, some laughing, others chanting so loud their throats tore. The air smelled of sweat, hot lights, spilled soda, and the metallic sting of panic. On stage, the contrast couldn't be sharper. Benny staggered upright, gripping the mic like a staff. His face was flushed, eyes fever-bright, his jacket clinging damp against his shirt. He jabbed a finger toward Chuck, forcing strength into his voice. "You cannot challenge the power of God." His words rippled across the arena, but they landed unevenly. Cheers erupted in pockets, but boos answered just as loud. The noise no longer belonged to him. Chuck didn't flinch. His posture was the same as it had been since he first stepped on stage. Shoulders squared, hands resting at his sides, face calm. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the chaos without effort. "I'm not challenging God. I'm reminding you that power without truth is theater." The sentence sliced the noise clean in half. A hush spread like smoke. The audience, moments from frenzy, froze between the two men. For once, even the chants stilled. Eyes swung from Benny to Chuck and back again, searching for certainty in faces that revealed none. Benny's chest heaved. He raised his hand high, straining to recapture the room. "Do not be deceived," he cried, pacing, his free hand shaking. "This is the enemy's trick, to divide us, to sow doubt in the Lord's house. You came for miracles, and miracles you shall have." He turned suddenly, crossing the stage in a burst of energy, reaching for Chuck as he had done to thousands of believers before. The cameras zoomed in, lenses trembling with the operator's own adrenaline. Benny's palm stretched outward, ready to press to Chuck's forehead, the same gesture he had performed countless times to drop people to the floor in convulsions of faith. The crowd gasped as one. Some screamed for Benny to stop, others urged him forward. Security leaned in from the wings, but hesitated, unwilling to step into a spectacle that had already spiraled beyond control. Chuck didn't move. He let Benny close the distance, hand rising, inches away. The cameras caught every flicker of the preacher's face, determination mixed with desperation, his body trembling under the weight of expectation. His palm hovered in the hot light, just above Chuck's brow. And then, just as Benny prepared to deliver the touch, Chuck leaned forward slightly. His lips moved once more, close enough that no microphone could catch the sound. The effect was immediate. Benny froze, his outstretched arms suspended midair. His face drained, color fleeing like water pulled from cloth. His mouth opened, but no sound came. For a heartbeat, the entire building seemed to stop. Every eye in the arena locked on the tableau. The preacher's hand raised, the fighter's head bowed slightly. Two men in a silence so sharp it rang louder than applause. Then Benny staggered. The hand that had commanded thousands shook, fingers curling. His knees bent a fraction, as if the floor had tilted beneath him. The cameras zoomed tighter, desperate to capture detail. Sweat trickled down his temple, catching the light like glass. His lips trembled, eyes wide, staring into a space no one else could see. The crowd erupted again, but this time it wasn't a chant. It was a scream. Some cried miracle, others heresy, but all felt the same electric crackle of something unseen filling the air. People climbed onto chairs for a better view, their phones shaking in their hands. Security barked into radios, overwhelmed. Benny's body swayed forward. Assistants rushed but stopped short, afraid to interfere. His hand hovered one last instant, then dropped limply to his side. His knees buckled. His whole frame seemed to fold in on itself. Gasps ricocheted through the stands. The cameras caught the exact moment his face went pale, his eyes glazing. He slumped, not theatrically, not with the practiced collapse of performance, but with the heavy surrender of a body giving up. The microphone clattered to the floor again, feedback shrieking before a sound tech killed it. Chuck remained steady. He hadn't raised a hand. He hadn't moved except for that whisper. His face was calm, almost solemn, as if he were bearing witness rather than taking part. The arena was no longer an audience. It was a battlefield. People shouted in tongues, others screamed accusations, some prayed loud enough to drown their neighbors. A fight broke out in the lower rows. Two women sobbed into each other's shoulders. Reporters spoke into their cameras with voices shaking, their feeds blasting across television and social media. For the second time tonight, Benny Hinn has fallen, and this time, after another whisper from Chuck Norris. We don't know what was said, but they didn't need to finish the sentence. The images spoke louder than commentary. On the big screens above the stage, the freeze frame lingered. Benny's pale face, his body folding, Chuck leaning in with lips barely parted. The crowd roared under it, a sound of hysteria and awe. And as the medics rushed forward, as Benny's assistants knelt again, as security strained to contain a crowd tearing itself apart, one question reverberated louder than the screams, louder than the music, louder than the chaos itself. What had Chuck Norris whispered? What truth? What memory? What blade of words, strong enough to bring the preacher to his knees not once, But twice? The camera zoomed in one last time, catching Chuck's unreadable eyes as the noise swelled to breaking. And the story stopped there, suspended on the edge of revelation, the answer hanging just beyond reach.